All right, we're back with another daily episode of AppStories for WWDC. I'm John Voorhees, and I've got Federico Viticci with me. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you? How are you feeling? How's the weather in California?
The weather here is beautiful. It's a little cool in the mornings, which I'm not, not accustomed to. I should have brought like a hoodie or something, really. But it's been beautiful during the day. I've got a little bit of a sunburn from the keynote still.
I was going to ask. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad, but I mean, the reality is, because I was in the shade for the vast majority of the keynote, except for maybe the first 10 minutes. And but I've been outside an awful lot more than normal, just kind of going from place to place. And most of the events have been outside, just, COVID and all that for example. And as a result, I've gotten a little bit of a sunburn on my nose and forehead, but not too bad.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you can hear Ginger barking in the background. I think there's an airplane that's flying nearby, and she's really
That's all it takes, huh? An airplane, she gets excited?
Yeah. John, before we get started with the show, what's the giveaway update?
All right, let me find it, Federico. Hold on a second. The giveaway update. Today, we have two new apps. We've got Textastic, which I can never say correctly. It's a text editor. Great text.
Textastic.
Yes.
Textastic.
It's not one you want to say quickly or multiple times. And Details Pro, which is a fantastic Swift UI design app. So we've got both of those. I will be taking those live a little bit later today, and I think we'll make the deadline. We're going to kick the deadline out until Sunday or Monday because I've been doing these all as Friday ones, but we're getting close to the end of the week, so I want to give people a little bit more time. And I just like sending out those emails, so I'll just send them out multiple days instead of all at once.
I know you really like doing that, so I'll let you do it because I know.
Thanks to your shortcut, it's not that painful.
Mm-hmm.
So
all right. Speaking of shortcuts, we're going to talk about shortcuts today. I've been watching I actually watched all the shortcut sessions. But yeah, I've finally started watching sessions. I'm working through my list. The way that I do it, by the way, John, is in the developer app. This is totally an aside about watching session videos. So I have issues. Surprise, I have problems. So in the developer app, you can go in and you can go into the sessions page. What I do is I mark everything as a bookmark. And so later I can just go into my bookmarks to see the sessions that I've marked for later. So I can work through those. And when I'm done watching a session, I don't mark it as, well, it gets auto-marked as watched. But what I do is I also remove the bookmark so that I know, as the list grows smaller, I know that I'm making progress on watching sessions. The problem that I have is that as of right now, in iPadOS 16, the developer app, the video player, does not have a full screen button.
I knew you were going to say that because I was shocked. I started watching the State of the Union. I was like, wait, there's got to be a button here somewhere to make this full screen.
And you cannot even pinch anymore. I think it's a problem with the video player, getting the new treatment in iPadOS 16, and maybe the developer app is doing things that it's causing the button to disappear. So I've been alternating.
Works on the Mac.
I know. But you're not on Ventura on the Mac, right?
No, that's true.
Yeah.
I haven't tried it on Ventura.
Yeah, so I've been alternating between watching the developer app in Stage Manager, so making the developer app small enough so that I can fit both Obsidian and the developer app in overlapping windowing mode, or just using Safari when I really want to have full screen. What I do with Safari, if I want to watch in full screen, is I drag it onto my external display that I can connect to the iPad via the USB-C cable that we talked about yesterday. So, but the downside there is that while there are new external display controls, there are no audio output controls, meaning that the audio plays, if Safari is playing a video on the C-Force external display, the audio plays through the C-Force speakers, which are not great. Ideally, I would like the audio to play through the iPad speakers, but it actually it gets routed to the external display speakers. Anyway,
I think that makes sense, though. I think that makes sense if it has speakers because that's where you have the app, right?
Yeah, but I wanna.
I know you don't like them. I know you don't like the speakers. They're not that bad either. I've got one of those. They're not terrible.
Yeah. And Ilter in the Discord. Yes, that is the full screen button in the developer app. You can see it on macOS. I cannot see it on iPadOS 16. It disappears or something. And if you pinch open to zoom the video and make it full screen, it doesn't work. So yeah, hopefully that button comes back at some point. So shortcuts. I want to talk about shortcuts and from two different angles. What they are doing with the new app shortcuts that I tweeted about today, we're going to have more on this front in the Monday episode of AppStories. On Monday, we're going to be taking a look at some big picture themes from WWDC, but I want to touch upon these app shortcuts right now as well. And then I want to go through a list of some of the new actions and improvements in shortcuts for iOS and iPadOS 16. Is that okay, John? Does that work for you?
Sure. I'd love to hear more because you've watched the sessions. I have not. I've been playing around, though, on my iPhone and iPad a little bit with shortcuts.
Yeah. So app shortcuts, besides the name, which is not a great name, I really think this is the Apple's best shot at making shortcuts more discoverable and approachable by people who don't normally use shortcuts or people who have been confused by shortcuts before. The idea with app shortcuts is that these are one-action shortcuts built by developers and pre-installed for you. They are ready to use. Each app on iOS and iPadOS 16 can bundle up to 10 app shortcuts. These app shortcuts, they are good to go. They are ready to use as soon as the app is installed from the App Store. In fact,
right, there's no configuration or anything like that.
No configuration. In fact, you could even use an app shortcut before you actually open the app for the first time. That obviously in the sessions they talked about this, like what if you want to use a shortcut that actually requires a login in the main app, and there's fallbacks for that too. But yes, the idea is that these shortcuts are ready to use. So that upfront configuration that was required from the users before is gone. But there's also an important conversation to be had here about how you discover these app shortcuts. Again, it used to be that you will maybe stumble upon these screens in apps before that told you, hey, these shortcuts can be donated, can be added to Siri. But you had to do that manually. There was the add to Siri button, and you needed to do that yourself.
Yeah, and I think too, Federico, I was going to say, I think too that calling it add to Siri in the past is confusing because yes, it does add it to Siri, but it doesn't tell the story about how that becomes something you can do in shortcuts too necessarily.
Exactly. Even worse was if you didn't stumble upon these add to Siri buttons, but you just opened the Shortcuts app and you had no idea what to do in there, the app was most likely empty. There were no shortcuts. And Apple realized this problem, recognized this problem years ago, and they added the folder called Starter Shortcuts, which was a collection of 4 or 5 shortcuts provided by Apple for free in the Shortcuts app. That was a good idea, but again, the problem was these shortcuts were not personalized at all. They were not specific for you. They were the same for everybody. So if you didn't care about one of those starter shortcuts, the app was effectively useless for you. Maybe it wasn't useless necessarily, but you had all that friction of having to create a shortcut yourself or manually adding the shortcut to Siri. All of that is gone in iOS 16. So imagine this. In September, you update to iOS 16. All your favorite apps update for iOS 16. Maybe some of them have these new app shortcuts. What will happen, practically speaking, is the following. You open the Shortcuts app, you will see this new category with all the shortcuts from your favorite apps. So that's immediately one problem, or at least 2 big problems fixed. The Shortcuts app is no longer empty, and these shortcuts that are pre-built by developers, they are ready to use, and they are immediately visible in the Shortcuts app. So you will get shortcuts in there that are good to use, and they will be specific to you because they will be shortcuts based on the apps that you are already using. Right. But more importantly, these shortcuts will be surfaced in many places throughout the system. You will find them in Spotlight. So for example, let's say that in September, you install an app and then you search for the app in Spotlight. The first result will be the app, but the second result will be the topmost app shortcut provided by the app. So immediately there in search, in Spotlight, you will find the app that you just downloaded and the first shortcut in the list of app shortcuts that the developer provided in the iOS 16 update to the app. You can also, all these shortcuts will be searchable by name. So if you want to search like you search for, I don't know, voice memo, you will find record voice memo, which is one of the new app shortcuts from the voice memos app. These shortcuts are also all enabled by default for Siri. So you can immediately start using them via voice on the iPhone, on the Apple Watch, on the HomePod, in CarPlay, without having to donate or adding anything manually up front. And I really feel like this has the potential to fix all of the discoverability and usability problems that have affected millions of people, arguably. I would say the millions of people have opened shortcuts and didn't have any idea what to do with the app. So now, Apple is basically shifting the conversation from being the user needs to set it up first before they can find some kind of utility in shortcuts to developers need to do the work this summer to make sure that these functionalities from their apps can be easily discovered by users as app shortcuts that do not require any setup or any installation or any configuration from the user.
Yeah, the other thing I like too, Federico, is when you go into one of those apps and their app shortcuts, there's a little hint there that you can use it with Siri. I mean, it's already been installed, like you said, but there's a dismissible hint. And to me, this is like just a different. They're coming at this from a different direction. Before it was add these single purpose, single action shortcuts from the Siri point of view, and they'll also work in shortcuts. But now it's you go to shortcuts and you've got the shortcuts, but you can also use them in Siri. I think it's from a user standpoint, it's a better entryway because I feel like Siri, especially because the UI of Siri is invisible, it adds even more friction to the process you were describing. And it works so much better if you can actually open an app and say, oh, here's a button that does a thing that's described right here. And if I want to use it in Siri too, I can do that if I want.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a great question in the Discord. Are these single action shortcuts or are these like real complex shortcuts? These are real shortcuts, and that's the other aspect of this. These are single action shortcuts as they are provided by the developers, but they are also regular shortcuts, meaning you can open them and you can modify them. And they're based on action with parameters, so you can tweak it if you want to, or you can add more action to that app shortcut. The trick here is that they're just enabled by default and pre-installed by default. But once you're feeling comfortable with them, at any point you can open the shortcut and modify it. You know, maybe you want to add a notification, or maybe you want to add an alert later in the shortcut. You can do that because these are regular shortcuts. They are just pre-enabled for you. And that's the trick here.
Right. If you go in, like all I've got right now are the voice memo ones, but if you go in, you'll see two of them, and there's record a new voice memo and play recordings in voice memos. And if you tap on the 3-dot button, what you get is the option to toggle on or off suggested search, and also an option to use in new shortcut. And if you use that option, what it will do is it'll start a new shortcut for you in the all shortcuts section that uses this one action as the first action in your new shortcut. So it's giving you kind of a head start. And from there, you'll have the option to, deal with the parameters for that particular action and then add others of your own.
Exactly. So you can leave them as is, or you can, use it as a template for something you want to build yourself and modify yourself. So app shortcuts, we'll see. I really think developers need to look into this and adopt them because it's going to, it benefits everybody. Benefits developers who can, advertise their app features throughout the system, and it benefits users. It benefits Apple because really there's nothing like shortcuts on any other platform at the moment. So I think this will be one of the features that developers need to consider this summer.
Yeah, and as a developer, it also is a means of advertising your app and kind of getting it in front of people in another part of the system, which I think is always a good thing.
Yeah.
This episode of AppStories and all of our WWDC coverage this week is brought to you by Collide. Collide sends employees important, timely, and relevant security recommendations for their Linux, Mac, and Windows devices right inside Slack. Collide is perfect for organizations that care deeply about compliance and security, but don't want to get there by locking down devices to the point where they become unusable. Instead of frustrating your employees, Collide educates them all about security and device management while directing them to fix important problems. Visit collide.com/appstories to sign up today. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Enter your email when prompted to receive your free Collide gift bundle after trial activation. At Collide, they know that IT admins are the most significant untapped resource and are key to solving the most challenging to fix security issues. Things like instructing developers to set passphrases on unencrypted SSH keys, finding plain text two-factor backup codes, and teaching end users how to store them securely, and convincing employees to uninstall evil browser extensions that may be selling their browser history. Those are just some of the many use cases that aren't solved by locking down devices. You can try Collide with all of its features on an unlimited number of devices for free for 14 days with no credit card required. Try it out at collide.com/appstories. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of AppStories and all of our coverage of WWDC at MacStories.
Now, let's talk about the geeky stuff. There's a ton of new actions and improvements to actions in shortcuts for iOS and iPadOS 16. I don't want to go through the whole list of all the new actions, but I pulled in a bunch of highlights that I want to cover today. In terms of new actions, so, a few that I want to call out. There's tons of new actions for notes. These include actions for moving notes, opening notes, changing settings of a specific note. This one is actually like one of the themes of the shortcuts actions this year. There's a ton of actions for changing the setting of something. I believe there are also like actions in this flavor for books. So you can change the setting of the reader in the Apple Books app. And in terms of settings for notes, you can tweak, for example, the how checklists behave, like all those kind of settings. The Safari actions, I have good news for you, John. I
see on the list.
The Safari reader actions are now on macOS Ventura. So we will finally be able to use the articles and Safari reader actions on macOS. And there's a new Safari action called Open View. What Open View does is it lets you open directly in Safari one of the specific sections of Safari. So, for example, bookmarks and history, but also reading list. So now we have an official way with a parameter-based action to open reading list directly, which is, I half jokingly tweeted yesterday, like this is the first new reading list feature in years. It's not really a joke, though.
It's true. It's very true.
It's I would have liked to see more, but hey, I'll take it. We now have a Safari action for opening reading list, so that's nice. Remove background from image. This is based on what you can do system-wide. You've seen the demos, so you probably played with it yourselves. You can lift the subject of any photo and drag it out and have it be, this sort of transparent PNG of the subject. And the thing is, this works with any image, right? It doesn't have to be a portrait photo. As long as there's a clear separation between the background and the subject, the neural engine actually takes care of isolating the subject and make it draggable. And this works in photos, it works in Quick Look, it works in any other image on iOS 16. And there's an action version of this in Shortcuts. So now you can remove the background from any images in Shortcuts. And I think, you can do some pretty fascinating things with this. Like I can imagine creating shortcuts that remove the background from something, get the subject, and paste the subject onto something else. Like that could be useful, I think. So that's one of the new actions. Another is optimize file size of PDF documents. Used to be that if you wanted to make a PDF document smaller, you had to use online web APIs for services that do this for you to shrink the size of a PDF. Now that's built into Shortcuts. And I believe it does this by looking into whether the PDF document contains any images and shrinking the resolution of those images, therefore making the PDF smaller. And there's other actions for voice memos, for the calendar, for mail. There's focus filters actions. So that feature will be part of Shortcuts as well. And then there's improvements to existing actions. I want to call out a few. Find notes. It used to be, don't ask me why, but the action to find notes used to be limited to 26 notes.
Not 25, not 27.
Not 26. With the find notes
26
action,
exactly.
if you tried to find all your notes, it would cap out at 26 notes. I don't know why, but that's fixed now. So now you can actually find all your notes from the Notes app, and you can add in filters and you can add in whatever you want to actually find the note you're looking for. But more importantly, for the Notes actions,
yes,
they now support formatted text and images. They now support rich text. These actions, and we talked about this before, I actually wrote about this on MacStories a couple of months back. They were always limited to plain text. So whether you used create note or append to note, whatever you fed to those actions, it would always be converted to plain text. So for example, if you passed some rich text from Safari, it will lose all of its formatting. Or if you passed an image to those actions in iOS 15, you wouldn't get an image in your note. You would get the plain text file name of the image. Because those actions made in the workflow days, many, many years ago, they were never updated to support rich text. Now that's been fixed. So they fully support rich text. They fully support images. I haven't tried with attachments like documents yet. I guess it'll work, but I haven't tried it myself. So now what you can do is things like build a Safari web clipper for notes that takes your rich text selection from a Safari web page and saves that to notes without losing any formatting. Or you could create a markdown shortcut that takes some markdown text, converts the markdown to rich text, and the rich text with all the formatting intact is saved to notes, to a new note, or maybe appended to an existing note. Even better, what you could do, theoretically, is create a shortcut that batch imports a folder of markdown files as rich text notes in the Notes app. So, I don't know, you want to move from Obsidian or IA Writer or Bear to Notes? In theory, you can now do this in iOS 16 without losing anything. You would get the folder, process each file in the folder, convert the file from Markdown to rich text, and create a new note with that rich text. And you got yourself a nice migration workflow for, Obsidian to Notes, or Bear to Notes, or whatever uses Markdown.
Yeah, that's a really powerful one. I think that we'll probably have a lot more ideas going forward about how to use that, because that probably has been one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me over the years in using Notes, is the inability to kind of drop things in it in an automated way that preserves rich text.
Yeah. So these are just some of the highlights of shortcuts this year. So far, I haven't seen any new scripting actions or improvements to choose from list, choose from menu, like that kind of stuff. Maybe they can come later. It's not unusual for shortcuts to gain more actions throughout the summer. One developer feature I want to point out, in addition to app shortcuts, I saw Simon Storing tweet about this, and I also saw this in the session. I believe you can now use those, what are they called? Like predicate filters in your actions.
Yes.
But basically, you can have your third-party actions in shortcuts can now support the same kind of natural language filters that the Apple actions use. Like, for example, in the Notes actions, like title is something, or title contains something. With those kinds of parameters that you can configure however you want, I believe that's what developers can now build as well. So that's going to be great, because it makes third-party actions a lot more powerful in terms of filtering and searching and querying a particular app's database in shortcuts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That'll be really nice.
Then, John, you had this idea to talk about, moving on from shortcuts, to talk about the things we did not get at WWDC.
Yeah, I kind of hate to round out this series with a downer, but I know there are things that we wished for that didn't come true, and we wish for it a lot, and we never expect to get have all of our wishes come true every year. But there are some things, and I think we should talk about some of the bigger ones. And one of the biggest ones on my list is widgets and notifications getting a makeover on the Mac, because they're still there behind the clock as they've always been, which I think is a shame. There's no Excel widgets on the Mac. There's nothing on the desktop. The notifications, you'll still only have access to a few of them at the top of the stack of widgets. I mean, I understand that notifications and widgets probably are more utilized and more important on mobile devices. On the other hand, I do sit at a Mac, and they are useful. They're just not very useful where they happen to be right now.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see basically no changes to widgets this year, whether it's how they're displayed on the Mac or the interactivity of those widgets, right? We were all kind of certain that they were going to do interactive widgets on the home screen, but they didn't. And I still think like the fact that they insist on these widgets being glanceable, I get it, but I think glanceable widgets, I want them on the lock screen for sure. But on the home screen, I still wish for, like a Now Playing widget that has playback controls, for example. And we haven't even seen updates to the shortcuts widget, right? That's another thing that we were wishing for, to have a more dense shortcuts widget, or to have an XL size shortcuts widget on iPad. Again, maybe that can happen later in the summer. I really would like to have a big shortcuts widget on my iPad home screen, but we'll see. But yeah, in terms of things that we didn't get, I was kind of hoping to see better audio controls, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. We did get, which is potentially going to be interesting for people like me who have long tried to record podcasts on iPad. We did get Driver Kit. Now, when I predicted Driver Kit on Connected last year, those guys, they made fun of me. Like, hey, what's Driver Kit?
I remember.
Is it a deep and open framework? And all the usual jokes that they throw at me. But they actually did bring Driver Kit to iPad this year. And with Driver Kit, manufacturers of, what is it, USB, PCI, I don't remember. There's 3 different I/O standards that are supported in the iPadOS version of Driver Kit. But basically, you can now install drivers for connected hardware in iPadOS 16. And you do this just like Driver Kit on the Mac, meaning Driver Kit on the Mac is confined to the user space. These drivers, they do not install in the kernel of the operating system. They stay in the user space. And they are, which means they're more secure. You don't need to install things at a root level and all that kind of stuff. But they are also installed via apps from the Mac App Store. And on the iPad, it's going to be the same. These drivers are going to be installed from the App Store. You will find them in settings. You need to enable them manually. There's going to be a toggle to enable those drivers. But in theory, it means that maybe, I don't know, Sound Devices, which is the company that makes the USB Pre 2 that I use to record my podcasts. And you have a Sound Devices accessory as well. You have the Mix Pre. In theory, Sound Devices could make an app with a driver for iPadOS. I'm very skeptical that they will, but in theory they can. And now that's only half of the story, though, because let's say that I can now have a driver to properly configure and use my USB Pre 2 on the iPad. But what happens at a sound routing level? Like, can I actually route the audio on my system exactly the way I want it? Meaning I can record my local audio, but also hear what's going on in the, in the Discord or Skype call. And can I also play a video elsewhere on my iPad without pausing the recording? Like all the usual problems that we've seen so far. Like, will Driver Kit make those problems obsolete? That's not clear to me right now.
No, I think at a minimum will allow you to do things like connect a printer or a scanner if you want to do that kind of thing, probably.
Yeah. And lastly, one other thing that I forgot to mention is we didn't get, and thank you, Jonathan, for bringing this up in Discord, we didn't get personal automations in shortcuts for Mac.
That's kind of shocking, really.
Yeah, I'm very surprised that we didn't get that. So yeah, this is just a list of some of the things that we didn't get. There's plenty of things we did get. I don't know. I was really surprised, for example, to see Safari extensions getting support for iCloud sync, so that now you can sync your extensions between devices. So some nice surprises in iOS and iPadOS 16 for sure, but a bunch of things we didn't get. And obviously we'll revisit this as the summer goes on and next year when we'll do our wishes for 17. But it's a topic for another time.
Yeah, I had kind of given up on Mail, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see Mail get all the kind of the exact features that I personally wanted. So very happy about that.
Yeah. All right, and I think that's it for this final daily episode of App Stories for WWDC. Before we move on to the Pro Show for App Stories Plus members.
All right, sounds good, Federico. I want to thank our sponsor for this episode and our sponsor for all of our WWDC coverage, which is Collide. And you can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.